I'm excited for this revenue hotline. Thanks for joining us, Steve.
Glad to be here. Glad to be here, my man. It's always it's always amazing to be in the presence of an epic beard like yours.
That's like a fraction of what it used to be. He had that plus the long hair. He looked majestic.
Yes, that's a good way to say it. I appreciate you guys inviting me on, and I'm excited about the conversation we're going to have, and I hope those that are joining or that are part of this will also pipe up. I want to make this a dialogue. Yeah, I'd love to hear from everybody else and what they're thinking, what they feel, and let's make it a real conversation.
Beautiful. Steve, why don't you give maybe just a quick intro? Who are you? What do you do for a living other than completely transform sales organizations?
Do you
Spoiler,
make a
but
living doing that?
yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, so Steve Reid, and I live here in Austin, Texas. So 5 years ago, I started a consulting company. You can kind of see it up here in the corner. Venitas is the company I started, and that was after spending 30 years in sales and doing just about every job you can imagine in sales. Everything from lead gen and inside, outside, enterprise, small biz, leading sales teams, you name it. And I just wanted to think about, 5 years ago, kind of hit that moment where how do I want to spend the rest of my career? What do I want to do? And don't know how many years I'm going to continue to work, but I want to make them fun. I want to make them exciting. I still love solving problems and helping people, and especially mentoring and coaching. Some of the most, fun times I have is spending time directly with salespeople and coaching and helping them along the way in their progress, because I know that made a lot of difference for me too. So that's what I do is I help companies with a variety of sales challenges, whether that's trying to figure out how to double their revenue or whether revenue's taking a dip and try to get back on track, sales process, sales tech implementation, a lot of training. So those are the ways I spend the majority of my time nowadays. You are,
Mark, you're on mute.
there we go.
I'm usually the one telling people to do that. So for anyone that's this is their first interaction with Steve, he's been an advisor for us for I guess what maybe the last I don't know 6 to 12 months. Been
Yeah.
fantastic in helping us obviously like elevate the message and pitch, and so I can't recommend him highly enough. But this meeting's not about us; it's about you. So let's jump right in. So the topic for today is the three incorrects that cause chronic sales underperformance, right? And obviously how to fix those. What are those?
Yeah. So first of all, let's talk about the chronic sales underperformance, because I think we need to frame that, right? So what do we mean by chronic sales underperformance? So there's at least a 10-year trend. When you look at the companies that do a lot of this, look back, how did things go last year, kind of survey and research. There are three or four that I follow. Corn Ferry, Topline, Pavilion, all do a really good job of surveying and doing a study of what the sales results were the previous year. So looking back at 2024, for example, there's a 10-year trend that companies that are part of this study are reporting that only about just a little over 50% of their sales reps actually achieve their quota or exceed their quota. So if we grade our performance as salespeople on our number, then how are we performing against that number? And if last year the number came in at 46%, and so 46% of sales reps did not achieve their assigned quota number. If you remember Bill Parcells, the famous football coach, one of the reporters asked him, what do you think of your team? And, how do you think they're better than their record? And he said, listen, you are what your record says you are. And in many ways, in sales, we have to be measured by our number. And we can be working hard, but we can be missing the number. So this is the problem, right? This is the underachievement we're talking about. And it causes all kinds of difficulties for the individual, difficulties for the sales team, difficulties for the company that are counting on that revenue and are planning their revenue plan according to the sales results that they expect to come in. So it's working inside of companies and now as a consultant, I started noticing that there were sort of three things that kept popping up when companies were really struggling with this issue, and most companies are. So, what were those three things? I kind of labeled them as the three incorrects. So it's three things that I think most companies are doing wrong. And when I've helped companies, if we can correct those incorrects, we see things change, right? So the first incorrect is companies are making incorrect assumptions about what they believe their sales teams are capable of. They believe their sales teams are capable of achieving certain things, that they have a certain level of talent, that they have a certain ability to execute. So they make assumptions about that, and those assumptions turn out to be incorrect. If they weren't incorrect, then more people would be achieving their numbers, right? And so they set the wrong targets, they forecast incorrectly, and a lot of this goes back to believing the sales team is capable of achieving more. And the way they're making those qualitative judgments is not based on actual objective facts. It's based on a lot of feelings and hope. So the second incorrect that I see is that companies are following an incorrect sales process. And part of it is if they have a sales process, they don't hold their team accountable to high adherence to that sales process. So they allow a lot of sort of fungibility. Just go get the deal, just go bring it in. And the research really tells us that about 60% of the time, if you're losing a deal, if you go back and look at your sales process and you look at it honestly, did you actually follow that process? Most of the times you'll find gaps. Right? And the biggest concern that I see is that a lot of the sales processes that are built for the company doing the selling, not for the buyer, the customer who's doing the buying. It's not customer aligned. And so that's an incorrect sales process. And then the final thing that I see a lot of is that we're training our salespeople incorrectly. So 80% of all sales training is focused on the product. It's focused on how our product works, how to demo it well, how to talk about it, how to compare it to the competition, how to talk and defend price. And so, what do you think salespeople talk about? Go out and get in front of customers. Well, if they spent 80% of their training is around the product, that's what they're comfortable with. And those become the conversations they have. But customers are telling us, hey, your salespeople know plenty about their product, but what they don't know is how to really engage me in a business conversation to understand what my problem is and how to solve that problem. And this is especially true when you have a complex business problem. You're selling a complex solution really to a community of buyers, a committee of buyers at a company. You had to navigate all of those. And many times the conversations they're having about product serves the people who are going to use the product on a daily basis. But that's not necessarily the people that hold the budget to buy the product at an executive level, and they're looking for proof of value. And that's not a skill that most salespeople are taught at depth. So those are the three incorrects. Those are the things that I run into all the time. And the good news is they're correctable and they can make a difference.
So just to recap, right? Incorrect assumptions, incorrect process, and then incorrect training.
The
Focus.
assumptions are all
Things-
about incorrect, really talent evaluation.
Yeah.
And the assumption around how good your team is.
Well, it's so funny, right? So we talk to CROs and VPs of sales every single day, right? Like hundreds every single month. And I'd say one of the most common things I hear is we really missed our numbers. Our team is really capable of doing more, but we don't have a process in place or no one's following the process and we don't really have a way of insisting in it. And I need to make sure that we have an easy, consistent way of doing that, right? Which comes down to, again, like then pulling in like the training and the focus, right? So like all three of those things, like in one sentence, I think every CRO comes through out the door and says the exact things, right? So let's start unpacking that a little bit because I love that, right? And I agree. When you're making those assumptions, what are the false assumptions? Why are people falsely evaluating their team in a way like either that's really optimistic or pessimistic? Like what is going on there and how do we fix that ultimately?
Sure. Well, so this is something I stumbled into probably 10, 15 years ago when I was trying to hire salespeople, right? As a sales leader, you're trying to add talent to your team. You're going out and you get a lot of candidates coming to you. Sometimes you'd like to hire people that have worked for you before because you know what they're capable of, but you know, there's still a lot of people that you have to vet. So the problem I was running into is the assessments that we were using that HR were providing for us were useful in that they told us a lot about the person's working style, about their personality, about how they might culturally fit. And those are all important things, right? But it didn't lead us to hiring better salespeople. We may have hired people that were really good culture fits. You know, they could get with the program, they accepted our mission, all of those things. But when it came right down to did they have the ability to sell? And did they have the ability to sell what we were selling in the environment we were selling in? We too often found that people struggled, took a long time to ramp. We had to invest a lot in them to get them up to speed. And it wasn't that they were bad people. It's just that we didn't have a handle on really the skill set that they brought in with them. And look, the resume and your stack ranking doesn't tell the whole story of your ability to sell at a new organization. So I found an assessment that looks at the skill of selling. And in fact, the research is all about, hey, let's take personality out of this because what the data really shows is that personality is not predictive of selling success. And I don't know how many, I mean, I've been around a lot of salespeople. I've seen introverts and extroverts who either thrive or struggle at sales. And so personality really isn't the predictor, it's a collection of skills. And it's a collection of specific mindsets and a collection of specific skills. And the degree to which you have competence in those really determines how good you are at selling. And that's also what you need to get coached to get better at, are those competencies. So that assessment is something I started using to hire salespeople. And then when I started my consulting company, I wanted to bring that science into the work that I do. So I went out and got certified, got trained, learned the science behind that, and work with that company to administer those sales assessments. And when we start an engagement with a client, one of the first things we do is we run that assessment on their entire team. And now we have an equal way of really evaluating everyone's skill set. We have a benchmark that we can put in place, and it gives us a specific roadmap of what to work on for the team to understand where they need help, where they need support, where their training is going to be most beneficial. And so that's what we do.
So when we send this out on Fridays, upcoming guests, et cetera, for Revenue Hotline, people respond back with questions. Actually, one of the questions we got from one of the listeners from last week, I think is like so top of mind. I'm actually just going to ask it, and maybe we can help solve their challenge. I've got the email pulled up here. I'm a first-time sales manager / VP of sales at a startup. I am looking to hire account executives and have 20 plus interviews lined up. If this is my first time hiring another account executive since I've been an AE, if you could only hire sellers based on 2 to 3 qualifications or skills, what would those be and what should I focus on?
Great question. And so here's the first thing to think about is you hire first for will. Are they willing to do the job of sales? And there are two really key factors here, and that is desire and commitment. So, do you want to be great at sales? How good do you want to be? You just want to kind of get by, or do you want to be like, how hot is that fire burn inside of you? This desire to be great, right? And to do the job of sales. The second thing is commitment. So, then are you committed to doing all the things that are necessary to be good at sales? And look, anybody that's been in sales any amount of time understands how hard it is. It's a grind. There are tons of things that most salespeople don't necessarily love to do. Like not very many people love the act of actually having to go out and prospect and make cold calls and build a pipeline. And that's hard work. And it's a lot of rejection. It's a lot of routine kind of things. They're not necessarily the most fun part of your day, but you got to do them, right? So do you have that level of commitment that is required? And then the skill sets are kind of based on the kind of selling you have to do. So more transactional, faster moving, less costly. Decisions are made at a lower level in the organization from the buyer. That requires less depth of skills than selling something that's of high value to an executive audience and lengthy sales cycles with lots of competition. So we have to look at those factors, and we can tune our assessment to really isolate those things. But there are a few things I would say right now. Like number one, you have to be able to build a pipeline. So hunting as a skill, very, very important. And these days, value selling and consultative selling and qualifying, and all of these are things on the assessment that we can score, right? We have a way of scoring those things. Like all of those are things that are super, super important. And then there's one thing in a category we call sales DNA. It's kind of like, how are you wired? And one of those things is your ability to stay in the moment. And this unlocks a lot of magic. The
Mm.
ability to understand that, well, what is the moment? Well, the moment is when you're in front of the customer, and we believe too often that that moment's about us. It's really about the customer. Too often we're thinking, I've got to do this demo. I've got to tell my customer about the pricing. There's so many things I need to share with them. And really, we need to start this idea with the moment is about the customer, and I need to be in this moment with them. I need to understand what they need, what they're trying to accomplish, what value they're seeking, how they measure that, what the nature of their problem is today, so that everything that I say is a reflection, of what we do to solve the problem that they're telling us they have. That is a really key skill that's all part of this as well. So hopefully that answers the question. Hire for will for sure,
Yeah.
upskill when you need to, but understand the skills are going to be necessary, and then look for those intangibles like that ability to really listen well, staying in the moment, and having a true dialogue with a customer to problem solve as kind of the things that take you over the top.
Well, I love that. So I was on a podcast recently, got invited to speak, and similar question kind of came up, right? And they were like, "Oh, okay, you're a CEO, you're bringing in, what do you hire for?" And I said very similarly, right? I think the only two things, like if I can only judge on everything else, is do they have the innate hustle, right? Because you're not going to teach someone,
That's commitment.
right? Either you have childhood trauma that you were trying to overcome through hard work, or you don't. And then the second thing is, are they coachable? And
Yeah.
my proxy for that always was, were they a college athlete? Were they a high school athlete? Were they competitive? Because like you have to be coachable and you have that competitive nature very easily in you. And if not, like those are the questions that I would like dive into. So I guess question back to you. You're interviewing salespeople, like, Mike, who sent in this email, it asks the sales rep, like, "Oh, are you committed?" Of course I'm committed. I'm so into it. How would you tease that out without an assessment? Like, are there questions you would ask that like get at that nature of, are they committed, and do they have the will and all these things?
Mark,
Yeah.
thank you for asking that. That was my question. There's a lot of technical co-founders as well, or founders that don't know. What if the candidate is good at sales enough to get the job, but not good at sales enough to execute the job, right? So how do you actually tease that out?
Yeah, and the interview is really important. So I believe in behavior-based questions because they have to explain through things that they have done how they operate, right? So when we ask sort of like factual questions, tell me how much was your quota last year and how much did you achieve? Okay, but what is the story behind that, right? So understanding the behaviors will tell you a whole lot more about the individual. So when you're talking about, do they have the hustle? So one of the things I'd want to know is tell me about your routine. Help me understand how you go about structuring your day. What systems do you use? Are you using anything to track? Do you have goals? Are those goals written down somewhere? How do you hold yourself accountable to those things? What actions do you put into place? Like they have to tell me a story about this stuff, right? It begins to tell me a lot. And I also want to listen for I language versus we language, because that tells you a lot about how they view their success and whether it's part of a team and their ability to collaborate and work with a team. Listen, no really great successful salesperson does it alone. And they have to understand like their ability to marshal their resources, work with other people, and respect the fact that a lot of other people are part of their success is really important. And you don't want a bunch of lone wolves on your sales team. You want collaborative people that you can scale what they do, right? And so those kinds of questions help me get more inside the person's thinking. And then there's two other questions I always ask. One of them is, what are your deal breakers? And it always throws people off. Like, what do you mean? It's like, what doesn't work for you?
I
Just
love that.
what doesn't work for you? And I want to kind of understand what they're thinking. And then listen, I might have an environment that doesn't work for you. And we should know now, right? The second question I ask is, if you and I checked in a year from now and you were able to tell me that this has been years ever, what would you hope would have happened? So I want to see what they're thinking about, what their goals are, what they prioritize, what all that means to them.
I was just gonna say something that we talk about is how you do one thing is how you do everything. And these behavioral questions kind of really highlight how do you actually go about your goals? How do you goal set? How do you accomplish that? And hopefully that translates to how you execute on the job.
Right. It's how would you structure your selling environment?
Yeah.
If you're not tracking your own goals,
Yeah.
then do I believe that you're going to follow a process and track your goals and be stage based and checklist based and disciplined and regimented? I don't know. I'm going to have a hard time believing that. Right.
I love the way that, especially those last two questions you framed, right? Because those questions can be asked in a discovery and should be asked in a discovery, right? And I think what a lot of sales leaders and managers get wrong is, they think about, and CEOs even, right, or co-founders, and they're thinking about like, how do I convince this person to join, and how do I like sell them on, the vision, et cetera. And it's like, well, yes, that is certainly a part of it, but I think just as much, if not more, you should be disqualifying bad fits from the
Yes.
organization and bad, just like you would disqualify bad deals, because
Right.
especially when hiring, if you bring someone in, it's going to take them 3 months to get ramped. It's going to take 3 months for results to show. And then it might take 3 months for you to offboard them if they're not a good fit. Not only did you just waste the better part of a year and some really expensive capital in today's market, like that could be such a morale hit. It could be like, it could ruin the culture. And so, if anything, like I firmly believe, like if you're very, very candid up front and you're like, hey, we are a culture that works in the office. We work on Saturdays. We are in the office till 8 p.m. If that's not a good fit for you, that's great. I have plenty of organizations I can intro you to. I think you'll be a great fit. But like just by disqualifying people who aren't a good fit, I think you're that much more likely to get someone who's like, no, 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 that's what I want. That's what I'm excited for. And then they're selling themselves on that essentially, right?
Right. I think you need to be real with people, right? You really do need to describe what it takes to be successful at your organization. And if you are a scrappy, more of a startup where you have to wear a lot of different hats and you have to figure a lot of things out on your own, and then you need to tell people that, right? Because some people will thrive in that environment, and that's sort of like constant me. There's a degree of change that goes along with being in more of a younger startup type of an environment. Some people thrive in that, and some people it really bothers them, and it's hard for them to achieve because they're looking for more stability than you can offer. Others, do really well with a lot of structure. If that's what you have and that's what you can provide, then that might be good for them. I will tell you that I I did better in smaller companies where a lot of stuff had to be figured out, and I had more decision responsibility and decision autonomy, and where problems needed to be solved, right? That was just my energy. That's my flow state. And there are salespeople that can do that, and salespeople that can't. But we have to be real with people because we don't want to set them up for failure either. It does them no service giving them a job that they're going to struggle at, and that we're not going to be seeing eye to eye on the expectations and what gets delivered. That's not good for them. So if we can find that out early, then that's actually a kindness
Yeah.
to just say, hey, listen, it's not a match. I'm sure you're a great salesperson. I don't know that you can be successful here because of these things. And then find the person who can and be prepared to support their development as they get ramped up and going.
Real quick, I see some of the participants. If you want to raise your hand and ask any questions live, that's what this is here for.
Yeah, I'd love to hear
I'm,
from you.
I'm, I'm noticing Olivia from one of our customers here from Your Money Line. So no pressure, but if you want to come up and say hi, or anybody else, just raise your hand and we'll call up on you. Yeah, I mean, to that point, right? Because like we hired some really great salespeople, but Recapped was not the right role for them because maybe they would have really benefited from something that was more structured. Whereas like, and this was on me, I threw them in the water and was like, go figure it out because that's where I thrived when I was early in my career, right? Like I got thrown in like, and it is unfair for me to just be able to assume that they're going to be able to fix it, figure everything out when we're selling a new category, a product that doesn't exist, and like literally building the space. And in hindsight, I would have done everything differently, but like that was unfair to them as well.
Hindsight is 2020, right? But it's the nature of a startup. Like it is
Sure.
challenging.
Well, and you mentioned the cost of a bad sales hire. You can Google it. You can kind of see what the statistics tell us. But I mean, a number that's sticking in my head that seems probably about right is around $600,000. And because you have to look at all the cost, right? What does it cost to recruit that person? What does it cost to invest in their onboarding? How much are you delaying their contribution that they would be making because they're still ramping? Then how long does it take them to ramp and actually contribute the revenue? Because you have to count that if you're not getting that, you're losing some of that. And then what is the cost of kind of replacing that? If they're working with customers, what hit do you take with a customer with a revolving door of reps? It can be a lot. And, even if you cut that in half, or, go all the way and cut it down to 150, that's still a lot of money to spend on a mistake, right? And then the wasted time, the time that it takes to get somebody hired, in the seat, up to speed, fully ramped, and operating at optimum. And the one stat that I have seen is it takes an average of 27 months in a job for a salesperson to hit their peak performance. So now they can be ramped faster than that, but peak performance means that you can count on them to achieve their numbers routinely over and over and over again. They're operating without undue amount of support that's required. They know how to get the job done, and other people can look at them and model their behaviors after them. That's peak performance. 27 months.
Yeah.
And so you want to try to get it as right as you possibly can and hire people that can get there faster if they're capable of it. But misfits in the roles are not good for you.
I remember I was just talking to, I think it was a CRO, and they were like, the first year is just a wash, right? The first year, like until they hit that second year, we don't even know what good looks like and to be able to model that, right? Now, it doesn't take 27 months if you have a platform like Recapped that helps you onboard customers and reps, but I
Of
digress.
course.
But joking aside, Olivia actually just in the chat here asked a really great question. So, when building playbooks, should we default to the seller's thoughts or the VPs of sales thoughts? Related back to Steve's comments about processes being built for the company, not the customer. Excellent question. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I have a million ideas on this, but curious what you think.
So that is a good question. And I want to clarify, Olivia, when you say should you default to the seller's thoughts or the VP of sales thoughts, or really, I think you should be defaulting to what is the customer going to think? How is the customer going to view this? What value is the customer looking for? Because we have to guide them to help them make a confident buying decision. And so our playbooks really should be designed with the idea of what does my customer need? What is my customer trying? What problem are they trying to solve? What value are they trying to move toward? Because ultimately, customers really don't buy our product or our service. So, Mark, people are not buying Recapped. They're buying what Recap can do for them. They're buying the value that Recap can create. I got to get something for this money that I'm spending. So we have to understand what is it that the customer wants as a future state? What does that look like? How would I measure it? Why would I care about it? How do I get there? And can you prove that you can do it? So understanding those various use cases that really are just descriptions of problems that customers are trying to solve and then building your playbook around how do we tease that information out of our customer, know it when we see it. In other words, we can diagnose which one of these issues it is, And then we can align the value of our solution so that our solution becomes that bridge that carries them to this future state where this thing that they desire lies and that they will pay for the opportunity to be guided across to get to that. So our product really is the bridge. It gets them there. I think you build your playbooks with those things in mind. And whoever your buyer is, that's the persona you need to convince. And your process really should be a mirror of that too. What is my customer thinking? How do I help them solve this problem? And what are all the micro decisions along the way that they're going to naturally make that adds up to the overall decision of I'm going to buy this from you? But they're making smaller decisions to get there. And if we can understand what those are and break them down into smaller components, build our process that way, then I think that leads us and them to what we both want.
Excellently said. So a large part of the onboarding and implementation that we do for customers is literally like taking what they have, if they have a playbook and a process, taking that and importing it in Recapped so it's easier to execute. But I don't know, 70-80% of our customers that come to us, they don't have a process, right? So they're trying to figure out what it is, or they have one and it's like really convoluted and it's not working, right? And like they're always coming to this, they're like, oh, I've got this thing. They show me an Excel sheet with grids of the columns being different stages in their CRM, and the rows are things that the rep has to do, the SC has to do, right? Like all these things. And then they're like, well, our deals are taking too long, our close rate's not where it wants to be, and our ACV is like not where it is. And I'm like, the first question I always ask is like, okay, well, let's ignore that process, right? And let's put ourselves in the shoes of the buyer. What is their ideal journey? And they're like, oh, well, it would be this, 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 and this. And I was like, okay, that is what we should start with, because these other things that you're doing, you're just adding friction. And like, yes, I'm sure a lot of that is put into place so you can have some validation rule that tells you if a deal is on track or not, whatever, right? But like ultimately, if you make it easier to buy, you are doing what Netflix did to Blockbuster, right? What Salesforce did to on-premise CRMs, right? Like you are reducing friction. And so focusing on that as the lens, 100%, right? And then I guess like, Olivia, if I build on that too, then it's like, okay, so once you have that, then what we've seen customers be really successful with is like, okay, the VP of sales and the leadership, they were brought in for a reason. So what is it that they want as like the macro level of like, what do they need for deals to be successful? And then you get the input from reps who are actually on the ground for what you need at the micro level.
Yeah.
Right? Looking at it from
Yeah.
the buyer, build the foundation. And then like, if you take this to reps and they're like, I'm not going to answer 27 fields, then you should probably scrap 22 of those, right? And like really figure out like, what is the 20% that is going to move 80% of the deals for you guys?
Yeah. I think it's really important. So the first thing I will say is that process is good, but process isn't sacred. All right. What is sacred is the outcome. Like, what are we trying to accomplish here? So let me just illustrate by saying if we build a 20-step process and then that gets us to the outcome, what if we have a customer that's ready after step 3? Are we going to force them to go through the 17 other steps because we have a process? I mean, of course not. I mean, you shouldn't. If you're doing that, hey, stop. But the the idea here is like, let's find out what the customer needs. Let's align what we have to that need and find a win-win way to get into business with each other, right? And let's have some ways to know that we've done those things, that we've accomplished those things. So it needs to be as fact-based as possible because there's a lot of feelings in sales, and a lot of the way we decide to believe we are where we are in a sales process is how we feel. Well, the customer's talking to us. The customer said some really nice things. I cannot tell you how many times early in my sales career I had to learn that when a customer told me, "Hey, send me a proposal." After my meeting, that was a polite way to say no. Right? They just didn't want to tell me no. So I, worked, put a proposal together, thought I was in great shape, was forecasting that deal, only to find out that they never called back. They ghosted me. And if I could get back in touch when they finally were honest enough to say, I don't think it's for us. Hey, appreciate it. Really love it. Got a great thing going on there. We'll call you if we need you. So look,
Really cool product.
right, right. Yeah, I love what you're doing. Not for us, right? So listen, we need to use our feelings, but they need to be calibrated and backed up by facts. So, what can we factually observe and what can we factually go and do along the way that allows us to give some confidence to where we really are and not be fooled about where we think we are? And then know the things that we haven't done and the things that we don't know that can add more confidence to this deal's, where it is, where it stands, how qualified it is today and not just 2 weeks ago. Is it still qualified? Can it be closable? And what do we need to do to get it over the line? And again, if we think of those things in terms of how do I make my customer comfortable with the decision that they're probably making right now, that I think leads us to the right place. It's the right kind of sales GPS. You got to turn this corner before you can get to the next corner. So that's a decision the customer has to make. Does this make sense to me? They're going to encounter a lot of decisions. Functionally, does this work? Financially, does this work? All the technical things that have to go into getting the business with you, does it work? Are there compliance issues we have to check off? Do we have IT security things that we have to make sure of? Any one of those can derail the deal. Even if they like what you have and you will sell it to them for something they're willing to pay, you still have to cross all the bridges with them, right? So it's just understanding all of that. And the final thing I'll say about this is even though CRMs are really built to envision a linear process, meaning I start at A and go to Z, customers don't buy that way. And customers don't buy based on what's next on your sales process checklist. Now, it's okay to have a checklist, but you really have to understand what the customer is doing. And particularly when you're working with more than one buyer at a single customer, they're bouncing all over the place, all around your checklist and all across your stages simultaneously. So, this is why I'm so enthused by a product like Recapped, because it allows us to really manage in a collaborative way how the customer wants to buy and then allow that to fill in the blanks with our sales process, but let activity and facts tell us the truth about how healthy this deal is and how far we have to go to get there.
Yeah. I mean, thank you. Yeah. I think at the core of it, it's really kind of unifying the buyer journey with the process and making sure that we're literally on the same page, like literally on the same page and being able to work together because so much of it is just taming the chaos. I say this all the time, but the only thing that cuts through the complexity of modern sales is collaboration. It's transparency.
Yeah.
I don't think we'll ever go back to one person making a decision. It's only going to get more convoluted because there's going to be noise from AI. Budgets are probably even going to get tighter, right? At least for the foreseeable future. And so being able to like win that dollar that everybody's competing for, you have to be able to rally everybody to the same table. So thank you.
I have a question on this. So we covered assumptions, and this is how we fix the second incorrect, which is process. What would you say to companies that are maybe not building their process for the first time, may have a larger team or a bigger company, where it just seems like a very daunting task to take on this thing, even though this is the best thing that they could maybe do? What would you say to companies? What advice would you give them to take on a task like this?
You just got to do it, right? You've got to resolve that it's important and you've got to get the right people on that project. I think it does help to get an outside view of things, somebody who isn't so emotionally tied up with the company, all the things that have been going on, that they don't have the baggage they're bringing from deals they may have lost or journeys that they've been on and battles that they've had to fight inside that organization, whatever all of that might be, right? We get emotionally attached to things that we've been through and that have happened in the past, and that sometimes it's hard for us to see beyond some things and look at things more objectively, and also bring an outside voice in that can help you share best practices and innovative ideas that others have done, right? So I think you got to get out of your own echo chamber sometime. And with these big tentpole type things, it's good to get an outside voice that doesn't bring all of that baggage with them. But you got to make it a project, right? You got to get the right people on the team, give it a deadline, and then just work through the issues. You need stakeholders who understand the customer from all angles. So people that have sold customers, people that have serviced customers, people who are trying to get the attention of customers through marketing. it's that holistic view. So if we're going to be customer focused, bring the people in who know the customers and then start laying it out, right? It's a trial and error process. It's a lot of editing of a draft till you get it down. And then here's the other thing to be aware of. You won't get it right the first time, right? So don't strive for perfection. Strive for functional with the right intent, and then be ready to take your experience using this new process, this new tool, this new situation, just as you do in marketing, right? You throw something out there, you observe, does that work? Kind of, but we have to tweak this. Same thing with your sales process. Be ready to adapt and adjust and strive for the least complicated process you can build that serves the customer and gets the job done. If you turn this thing into the TPS reports with the right cover page and office space, you're going to get what you see, right? You're going to create an organization and approach that is overly officious and process oriented that doesn't really serve any purpose. So try to simplify. And again, this is where someone from the outside can really help you is by showing you what doesn't belong. Like we don't really need that. Like if you need to track that, it doesn't belong in your sales process, right?
Yeah.
Or automate.
I saw a sales process at 13 stages, and probably six of those were all about an internal need to collect and consume and look at data. It wasn't helping the customer at all, but they had put all that stuff in their sales process. So it doesn't mean that that isn't valuable stuff to look at and observe and collect and wonder about and whatever you want to do with it, but it doesn't help the customer buy, doesn't help the customer make a decision. So you got to get it out of there and somewhere else. So things like that. That's what I would say, Ush.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, even going back to Louis' point, something that we do on our team is even if the idea is great with its intent and ideally it might work, if it's causing friction for our team and if it's not necessary, we continuously iterate. And it sounds like you should have an iterative mindset on it, see what's working for both your VP or your seller, but really focus around your customer and be willing to make the changes as necessary as you grow.
For sure. Yeah, we can't fall in love with intentions,
Yeah,
right? I mean, I think we need to start with good intent. That's the right
for sure.
mindset to walk into. We want to do this thing for the right reasons. But when it becomes apparent that this just isn't necessary or isn't working, or despite intents, this isn't helping, we can't have fallen so in love with that thing that we're not able to give it up and get rid of it and move on to something else. So, and this is why it's so hard sometimes for companies to start because they have so much that they're holding on to. And it's hard for them to edit out and give up some things that they hold as true, which may not be true, right? Or may not be valuable anymore.
Well, that's why I think starting from first principles is so important, right? It's like every 3 to 6 months, it's like, okay, what can we throw away? What can we start from scratch, right? What can we, or start from first principles at least, where like, what did we learn over the last, 3 to 6 months where it's not applicable anymore, right? Or maybe, hey, we had the good intention, we tested it, the results didn't come back favorable, but we learned something, and now we're going to pivot, right? And we're going to adapt.
Yeah.
And my recommendation is just like, don't have any ego, let the best decision win. It doesn't matter who came up with it, right? Whether it's an SDR or CEO, it doesn't matter. Whatever's best for the customer is usually probably the better idea at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's some really great examples that we can carry over from other walks of life. And to this point, I saw an interview that Kobe Bryant did one time, and he was talking to a bunch of college athletes, right? And of course, they were totally in awe of him, and rightfully so. Well know what he was able to accomplish in his career on the basketball court. And the way he always seemed to be elevating his game and playing at the top of his game in the entire league, the best of the best of the best, and he's better than them. Right. So, one of the college students asked him about how he maintained his competitive edge and how he sort of thought about like, okay, that last year I had a great year. How can I be better. And I thought it was very interesting what he said. And he said, it all starts with looking at what I need to edit out and things that I've got to get rid of. And he talked about what some of those things are. At certain points, he had to get rid of bad habits around diet. He had to give up some things that as he got older were previously not a problem, but are a problem now. He also talked about having to edit out relationships that were not going to be good for him any longer, that he had grown past or that were toxic to him and what he was trying to accomplish and the person he wanted to become. And I think we have to do that too. We have to look at things that we have to edit out. And I was really kind of surprised and impressed that he started there, as opposed to what you think of as I got to add in something. I've got to start doing more things. And sometimes actually the best addition is getting rid of something and thinking about what you can get rid of that doesn't really, in our case here, talking about how we do sales better. Let's get rid of some of these incorrects that we've been doing over and over again. Get real about really where we are, how good our team is, help them get better by training them on the right things that make a difference. And it's not more stuff about our product, it's more stuff about our customer and what our customer cares about, and aligning all the things that we do to really serve the customer's need. And we'll get what we want, and the customer will too. But a lot of that is just editing out.
I love that. I was fortunate enough to hear Kobe speak at a conference my last company hosted. I was blown away at his eloquence when he speaks about business and entrepreneurship. And to your point, what you just said is something Mark and I practice. We start with ideas that are big. We throw everything that we can at the wall, and we live by perfect is not when there's nothing left to add, but perfect is when there's nothing left to remove. You're just left with what you need, only the
That's
things that you
awesome.
need. Being mindful of time, I do want to go into training. So we talked about assumptions, we talked about processes. Now that you are making the right assumptions, now that you have hopefully an iterative and growing process that you're implementing, how do you train your reps on these things?
Yeah, so thought a lot about that, and I put together a methodology that I use because I had to systematize what I was doing too, right? I had to figure out how to help the most people I can possibly help across all the companies that I can work with. And the best way to do that is not by flying by the seat of my pants, but have a sort of a systemized approach that I can adapt to what their needs are. So the thing that I thought about is that sales is a series of winning moments. So there's a lot of things that are going to go on over the cycle of an entire sales engagement that we have with a customer. And I look at those interactions and those moments as this is a moment where I can win this moment and keep going with this customer. And I might lose this moment and I might lose the whole sale if I don't win this moment. Or if I lose this moment, it might be recoverable if I'm far enough along that I can come back and correct it and I've got enough goodwill or I can reset or whatever. But if these moments are there, what are they? Can I identify those? And also, what skills do I need to win those moments? So it's like the baseball player that has to hit, that's a moment when they're up at the plate. They also have to field, that's a different moment, a different skill set, but it's all in the same game, right? They have to throw, they play defense, they play offense, they have to do situational things, and they always are collecting and practicing a set of skills. And when do you think was the last time that Michael Jordan practiced free throws in his career? Probably the last day he played, right?
Yeah,
And he probably still
all the
shoots free
time.
throws. But the idea is you never stop working on the fundamentals because that's the thing that gets you there. So the four key winning moments that I've identified and then built a curriculum around are discovery, the moment that we have to first encounter the customer and understand what's going on, what they need, what they care about, what has them interested in a conversation with us, what they're trying to solve. So there's a set of skills to do great discovery. Second moment is now that they're convinced that they should keep talking with you and you've won that discovery, you have to align your values. So, value alignment. Here's what I have that fits with what you say you want. Let me convince you and show you and explain to you how this is valuable to you. And then there's the business case. So we have to craft that into a compelling business case that all the way up to the executive buyer, they can say there's a reason to do this. And it's not just because someone's job's going to get easier, it's because while their job gets easier, the company does better because we attach to certain key metrics that we care about that we will invest in. So we have to build that business case and have those conversational skills. And then the final one is close management. So how many times have we gotten the yes and it takes 3, 4 months to close the deal? So how do we actually manage after we get the yes, to get the deal all the way over the line, to get it signed, sealed, and delivered? So those moments, and I have a curriculum around every one of those. There's probably about 20 different classes that I teach around those things, and they seem to work. They seem to make an impact, and we see positive things happen. And look, you add that to your product training, and now you've got a really well-rounded salesperson who understands how to converse about business, how to work with the customer appropriately, and can still talk about your technology accurately and can demo it well.
Well, what I love about your approach is that no amount of product training is going to overcome those gaps, right? Like
Right.
no, very few products are so amazing that if you don't have that foundation in place, you're actually going to get the deal, right? Whereas if the opposite is true and you're able to lay a foundation, people will assume that your product actually solves that based on the questions of the way that you carry yourself in the day,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so
They're much more open. They're
yeah,
much more open about it. And I will say also, Mark, that the skills that I teach are transferable to any company, to any product, to any solution that you sell. You need those good skill sets to sell anything well. So it's an investment in your own career when you do it, not just in the job that you have today.
I can't speak enough good things about Steve. So if you are looking for a trainer, consultant, someone to just bounce ideas off, talk to him.
You can look me up on LinkedIn, Steve Reid. Shoot me a connection request if we're not connected already, and then send me a direct message. I'd love to talk to you. You can also get me at steve@venitas.com. So if you want to send me an email, I'd love to hear from you. This is interesting. If this feels like BS to you, I want to hear it. So, I need to hear it all, right? Good, bad, or ugly. But yeah, Steve@Venitas. Send me an email, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with you. And if nothing comes out of it, but that we get to know each other, that's valuable to me. But if you need help, I'm here to help.
Well, I obviously I have nothing but glowing reviews. So if anybody recap customer, anybody in our network, feel free to ping us. More than happy to make an intro. Thank you so much for coming on. This was golden nuggets as always.
As always.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, guys.
Yeah.
Appreciate you giving me the microphone, so to speak. And I absolutely appreciate getting a chance to talk to everybody that was on the call here. And also just my opportunity to work with you guys on a routine basis as you're building a powerful company. I'm probably bringing a bunch of those ideas that you had to edit out. So, because I'm full of them. But it's great seeing what you guys are doing. And I think you're on to something really, really magic. And I'm glad to be playing some kind of a part in it.
Thank you.
Honestly, Steve, it's been gold as always. And for us, we are nothing without our customers. We are nothing without our advisors. And your input has guided us to build something useful. To your point, if we're not building and delivering value, then it's pointless. So we thank you for your time and your input.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much, guys. Until next time. And I'm always listening to this thing. I'm on this thing every week if
I
I
know
can
you're
get
on
in.
every week. We called on you last week. For everybody else, thank you for attending. Obviously, Mark Fairshane, CEO, Recapped. If a lot of what we actually talked about today resonates with you, we have a solution that does that without having to change your process, without having to create anything new, pretty much out of the box. You're able to solve a lot of these problems. And it comes down to collaboration and unifying what you guys are doing with what customers want ultimately. Uj, thanks for being part. And everybody else, you enjoy the rest of your week. So
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
appreciate it, guys. Later, everybody.